Hello and welcome to Photographic Connections, the podcast where we create connection to self, nature and others through the art of photography. My name is Kim Grant, the founder of Photographic Connections and your host for this podcast. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be welcomed by Nick Page, a weather photographer based in America who's well known for his YouTube channel. We speak about his journey into photography, the incredible adrenaline rush of chasing storms around America, and experiencing imposter syndrome in the photography industry. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nick Page. Well, hi Nick, thank you so much for joining the podcast this week. It's an absolute privilege to have you here, and it always blows my mind when we're able to speak at such far distance from each other, because you're based in Washington State, which is just incredible. And I want to speak to you this evening really about your photography, about your connection to nature, because your journey kind of into photography, I've heard, is quite different to other people's. So shall we begin there? I'd love you to go way back to the beginning and explain kind of what led you up to getting into photography in the first place.
Well, like you said, it was a little different than some. I have a very blue collar background. So my background is all like labor jobs. And before photography, I was a golf course greenskeeper for like 12 years. And I thought I had the world's greatest job because I spent it all day, every day outside, not using my brain, just mindlessly mowing grass all day long. It gave me lots of time for podcasts and audiobooks. And it wasn't until I actually hurt my back really bad. So I herniated a couple discs. I had 2 different injuries. And the second time that I herniated that disc, I was actually completely bedridden for a month and a half because I have something called stenosis of the spinal column, which means that when you have a herniated disc, the nerve pain that associated with that is way, way worse than it is with the average person. So I was completely bedridden, and I had nothing but time on my hands. And I knew that just because of the amount of pain I was in, I needed to occupy my mind with something. And for whatever reason, I decided to just start watching photography and videography tutorials on YouTube. And this was 2012. So at that point, I'm like 32 years old and didn't own a camera of any kind, never had really. The only photography I had ever done was like with a little cheap disposable film camera. And I was kind of interested in the videography side of things. I have a history with audio production, and I was always in music and bands and the audio side of creativity, but never with the visual stuff. And so I sat there for a month and a half on a couch on painkillers watching photography tutorials. And after I had my surgery, got my first camera. And by the time I got my first camera, I knew all about the exposure triangle. And, you know, I started off shooting in manual. I knew a whole bunch because you can really absorb a lot of information in a month and a half. And that's kind of how I got started. I started photographing my kid. And then then the neighbors saw the photos that I took of my child, and they wanted me to take photos of it. And then it just kept snowballing. Within the first couple months, I shot my first wedding. And within the first year, I was making more from doing photography on the weekends than I was during my day job. And then I went into, doing photography full time after only having owned a camera for a year. And it just kind of snowballed from there. It's not the typical start. It was very late in life. I had never used a camera before in my life until I was like 32 years old. But for whatever reason, it just really resonated with me and I loved it.
That's amazing. I often find that when people get this like diversion in life, like something major will happen to someone and it seems to spark something new within them. And it's amazing actually that even though you were in this really kind of dark place, I'd imagine, not being able to do anything, it was like within that you still found this interest in something new that then went on to to be such a success for you, and to be able to go professional after just a year is almost unheard of, isn't it? A lot of photographers are slogging at it for years and years and years before they get to the stage where they're earning anything from it, never mind being able to go full time. And do you still do kind of some portraiture and wedding stuff? Because I know now you spend a lot of your life kind of traveling around the world doing nature stuff. So does that still play a part in your work as well?
Not really so much anymore. There are definitely times that I miss that type of stuff because I used to do a lot of like sports photography as well, which I really, really enjoy and I really loved. And, you know, that's part of why I enjoy shooting wildlife is it's very similar where you're just trying to kind of be a fly on the wall, keep up with what's going on. And as opposed to landscape photography where you're kind of micromanaging everything. You know, you have full control over, you know, the time of day that you do the shoot and, you know, the angles and everything. But with sports and wildlife, you're very much just trying to keep up. And I miss that aspect, and I miss lighting portraits and those kinds of things. But I kind of phased a lot of that stuff out slowly. Some of it was more difficult to phase out than others because, you know, there was a couple of years there where I was shooting 28 weddings a year, which is, you know, anybody that shot weddings, they know that not only is that a lot of weddings, but it's also a lot of income that you have to try to replace somehow. And so it took a while to phase that stuff out, but I did. And I don't really do much of that stuff anymore. But I will say that it's made me a better photographer. Just having those other background, the discipline in those other, or the background in those other disciplines, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's made me a better landscape and nature photographer because it's taught me a lot about, you know, the importance of the moment and the decisive moment, and it makes me think about those kinds of things while I'm shooting landscape photography.
I love that because I love it when people can kind of go back through their story and they can see the little snippets that play up to where they are now. And it's really good that you can look back at your kind of wedding and portraiture days and see what that taught you and what skills it gave you that you've then brought on to doing your nature, your landscapes and your kind of wildlife stuff that you do now. And you do kind of travel quite a bit now, don't you? You go to some incredible places and photograph some of the most insane scenery, and you have the most fun time doing it. Like, that's one of the things I always feel when I'm with you, like watching your videos, for instance, on YouTube, is you're just always just having such a fun time, or you're connecting incredibly deeply with the landscape around you. And it just shows how much being out there in nature really means to you. And I actually think I came across a video of yours recently where you were speaking about photography like a form of meditation almost for you, and being out there in nature. And yeah, I kind of wanted you to delve a little bit deeper into that, because part of Photographic Connections is about speaking about this connection to nature. So what do you think it is particularly about being in nature with your camera that you find so exhilarating and exciting?
Well, for me, you know, honestly, when I first started going out with my camera, I was far too results oriented. You know, I was so hyper focused on, am I getting a good shot or am I getting the shot? And as I've done photography longer and, you know, my portfolio gets larger, I feel less and less pressure to get an amazing photo every time I go out. And honestly, especially with the type of photography that I enjoy most, which is a lot of times it's, you know, dramatic weather and big waves and that kind of stuff. That stuff doesn't happen every day. And just disconnecting the journey and the enjoyment of going out with my camera and spending time out in nature, which, you know, I feel is like our natural habitat as a human, you know, that's where we're happiest. Disconnecting the enjoyment of being out with the need and desperation of getting a good photo and just being able to enjoy being outside with my camera, that has made me so much happier when I go out. I've put a lot less pressure on myself to try to get a good photo. And honestly, whether I get a good photo or not, that's totally irrelevant now to my enjoyment of going out. And I find that the less pressure that I put on myself to get those photos that, you know, belong on the website or whatever, the happier I am. And I actually do better at photography because I feel like as a creative person, we are our most creative when we are happy and when we're in a good mood and when we're, almost in a childlike, I don't know, where you're a kid in a candy store and everything's exciting and everything's fun. That's when you create your favorite images, I think, simply because you're in a more creative space. See, it's hard to be really creative when you're down in the dumps and mad at yourself, which represents like the first half of my photography journey when I would go out and try to do landscape photography, because landscape photography is not super easy, especially when you aspire to create those big dramatic epic landscapes, which turns out really hard. It's not the kind of thing that happens every time I go out.
There's some amazing nuggets of knowledge almost in what you've just said. The whole connecting with that childlike wonder, being most creative when you're kind of happy. And like, I'm really realizing that, and I'm sure you felt this a bit with your YouTube channel, for instance, because I know it's something I've felt a few times. When you're putting out this content a lot, you're of course wanting to have good videos, good conditions, good photographs, because you just kind of feel almost like this pressure in some ways to do it. But I'm starting to release that pressure within my work now of saying, do you know what, a lot of shoots don't go to plan, and it's part of being human to show that as well. And do you find that as well? Like, obviously your photography, it's amazing now that you're kind of stepping back and just being free and really connecting. But when you have this other aspect to your life and your creativity of putting these videos out, do you ever feel the pressure for them to create something kind of epic and inspiring, or are you kind of stepping back that pressure from that now as well?
Definitely still feel the pressure there, and honestly it's really impacted my productivity on YouTube, simply because the kinds of videos that I like to create are these kind of cinematic journey into a trip, and the kinds of opportunities that film well just don't happen all the time, and it's so much work to put together and to do really well, and I only want to do something if I do it well. And it used to be that I put all this pressure on myself to put out really regular content, because that's really the only way you grow as a channel. But I've recently allowed myself the freedom of only creating videos when I'm inspired to, or when the opportunity actually presents itself, rather than trying to go out and either create content that I'm not happy with, or create content just for the sake of trying to create content, or like battling, trying to make a good video out of a less than stellar opportunity. So I guess I've allowed myself the freedom of not creating content just for the sake of creating content. I try to only create videos when I actually really want to, and as a result, I'm usually happier with the results.
As a creative person, that's definitely so important, isn't it? It's kind of getting that balance right of keeping things going, but ensuring that what you're putting out there is what you're comfortable to show the world. And if you're somebody who's wanting, epic adventures or good scenery and videos that you can make into something really inspiring that speaks to you, then, like you say, those opportunities don't come around every day. And yeah, I think a lot of creatives, especially people who do anything social media based, it doesn't have to be YouTube, it can be Instagram or TikTok or anything, they kind of feel that pressure, don't they? If they're not showing up every week or consistently, you kind of get forgotten, because the algorithm often forgets about you on some of these platforms. And I guess it would be nice to kind of delve in a little bit deeper into your kind of YouTube, because you've been on it for quite a while now and you've gained quite a big following. So what was it that kind of sparked your interest in beginning a channel?
It's kind of just, it's I guess a personality trait more than anything. Everything that I've ever been decent at. So, I'm an avid golfer. So back in the day, I used to give golf lessons, and I don't know if I've got a drum set in the background. That's because I have a background in audio and music, and I was a very serious drummer, touring musician for a while. And as a result, I gave drum lessons. And when I started, getting really serious about photography, like everything else, I got really serious about it, because I'm the type of person that just obsesses about whatever I'm into at the moment. and I wanted to start talking about it and sharing the things that I learned. And my early YouTube videos were pretty much like, here's a pair of gloves I just bought, or here's a new tripod that I just bought, and let me tell you what I think of it. And then as I got better, people kind of started to want to know more of what I knew, like, how did you do that thing in Photoshop or whatever? And I've always enjoyed sharing knowledge, I guess, and sharing a dialogue with people with a similar interest to me, because time spent nerding out about your favorite subject is time well spent. Surrounding yourself with like-minded people it keeps us happy, I think. And so that was just kind of my way to create community and spend time nerding out about the things that I liked most. And then as I got better with creating videos, then I started really getting into the more like, the actual video making process and try to make things a little bit more cinematic. And it's just another creative outlet. If I have enough video clips and things like that at my disposal, and I pick the right music and stuff, putting together a video and having something that you're proud of at the end is as rewarding as coming away with a good photo. It's just another creative outlet that can be really fun. And where I started, and we kind of touched on it, where I started kind of struggling is when you have a smaller channel and it's growing and it's up and coming and everybody's like rooting you on and you have all this wonderful support system, everything is great. And then like as you start to get a bit more subscribers, and you have larger numbers, you for one, you start to feel the pressure of like, I have all these people that I can't let down. And then you also have you're no longer the underdog that people root for. You start being seen as the person that like, oh, he's the big fancy famous photographer. Let's see if I can find a flaw in something that he said. And then come all the trolls. And that's where, I've started to struggle a bit creatively, simply because I don't have the thickest skin in the world, and I wish that I did. So when I do, I'll get like 150 glowing comments on a video, and then I'll get that one negative one. And for some reason, the only one that I can remember and I think of is that one negative comment. And it's one of those personal things that I have to work on. I need to develop that thicker skin because it bothers me so much, and it kind of undermines my productivity and my creativity and makes me feel like, well, why do I even do this anymore? Because Steve 105 doesn't like me. And it's funny how that works, but it's true. And I don't know where I was going with that, but that's one of the struggles that I currently have.
It is hard, isn't it? I mean, I think as humans, we naturally get drawn to the negative comment. It's a psychology thing. I remember reading about it recently. We naturally, because we want to be liked as humans, if there's like just one person out there, even if we have no idea who they are, just some randomer on the internet that says something negative about us, it sticks with us because it goes against, I guess, our innate need to be part of a tribe and feel like we're part of something. And we really struggle with that. Mm-hmm. And it's good, I think, when people like yourself speak about things like this, because people who aren't involved with the kind of content creation, YouTube side of things, people don't always realize that what they post on certain posts or videos or whatever, it really affects the person making it. And sometimes it can also be quite difficult, can't it, to distinguish between somebody who's being really nasty and somebody who's trying to give constructive criticism. It's not always clear, and it can be quite difficult at times. And one thing I noticed actually on your Instagram last week was you were speaking about the fact that you've been suffering a little bit recently with Imposter Syndrome. Are you happy to speak a little bit about that? Because I think it might be quite an interesting thing for people to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've kind of made it my personal goal is that on social media, I tried to be the person that is real and transparent, because one of my biggest pet peeves with all of social media, Instagram probably primarily, is that people only put their highlights out there. They only talk about, oh, I'm doing this amazing thing, and then I'm doing this other amazing thing, and my life is just great. And when people follow, people with large followings, Instagrammers or YouTubers or whatever, influencers, they have this unrealistic view that like they have this amazing life and everything is just peachy, and if they're so happy, what's wrong with me? And so I try really hard to, to put the bad out there with the good a little bit, and to talk a little bit about the fact that, just because you have a large following on YouTube, by the way, whoop-de-doo, who cares? Doesn't make that person any better than anybody else. Just because you have a larger following doesn't mean that you never suffer from being depressed or feeling like an imposter, because no matter how long I do what I do, and no matter how many opportunities, which are amazing, that I get to like go talk at conferences or to teach workshops, or no matter how much of that stuff happens, it's difficult to not sometimes feel like you look around the room and you see all these amazing photographers that you look up to, and you can't help but wonder, what the hell am I doing here? Like, what? How did I get invited into this group of people that are so much better than me? Because, as a photographer, we see our entire Lightroom catalog. We don't just see the highlights, the 5-starred images. We see all the bad ones, and we know all the terrible photos that we've taken to get those few good ones that are the ones that the rest of the world sees. And so we always feel like as the individual, as the photographer, we know the truth. We know that like we take some really bad photos sometimes, and I'm sure glad that all these other people don't see those. And so it leaves you with this feeling of like, like feeling like an imposter. And it never goes away. On one of my posts recently, Michael Shainbloom, who is a photographer that I've always admired, and I'm lucky enough to consider him a friend, he talked a little bit about on one of my posts about how like he even suffers from imposter syndrome. And this is a person with 1 million followers and is widely respected as one of the best landscape photographers in the United States. And he feels it. And if he feels it, who doesn't, because the rest of us mere mortals, how are we not going to feel it? So it's something that never goes away. Most people will struggle with it, and I struggle with it too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really important thing to talk about, and it's something that I'm actually seeing more and more people coming out and speaking about it. It's definitely becoming something that people are much more open about speaking about now, which is really good to hear, because I think for so many years now, not just in the photography world, but in any world really, when somebody kind of builds a following in whatever way, when they keep all of this stuff to themselves, it can become quite destructive. That pressure gets on top of them. The dark moments get on top of them. It's that pressure to always feel like you have to behave or act a certain way or produce something. And yeah, I think everyone, even probably the most famous people in the world, experience imposter syndrome from now time and time again, because I guess we aren't built the way we live in the modern day world. We're not built to be known by thousands or millions of people. In some people's cases, it's we're meant to be kind of known within our little tribes like we used to be, and now it's like all these people know who we are, and it's strange, and the bigger you get often the harder I imagine it can get as well. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, 'cause I think it's a really important thing for people to speak about, and kind of the more, like I say, the more that speak about that, the better it might be for anyone listening who's feeling that as well, even in their day-to-day lives, no matter what job or group they may be a part of. I think everybody experiences it from every single walks of life. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to speak to you a bit about as well, like, again, going back to your love for nature. Like, one of the things that really strikes me about some of your videos is when you go out chasing storms. Like, you're out there in it all, and some really incredible things you've witnessed. But I kind of think it's brave to be out there doing these things, and you produce some of your storm images are some of my favorite shots of yours that you've ever taken. So what do you think it is about going out in these moments where most people would run and hide, and you're out there chasing these storms and chasing this incredible weather? It must be a really exhilarating experience.
It absolutely is. It's all absolutely terrifying at times, but it's, again, it's just kind of getting back to photographing what is inherently interesting to you as a person, right? And growing up, I was always the kid that, when there was a thunderstorm, I went out and I watched it. And I was never the person that sat in the house. I was the person that went out and drove to the top of a hill to watch a lightning storm roll into town or whatever. I've just always been fascinated by the power of Mother Nature. And, a lot of times I refer to myself more as there are people that are landscape photographers that go out to photograph the landscape. I've always considered myself a weather photographer because really when I analyze my favorite images that I create and my favorite experiences when I'm out shooting, it's always to do with something special that Mother Nature is doing. Something special that either conditions wise or, a big, beautiful sky that is not something you see every day. A lot of times, whatever is underneath that horizon, below that horizon, that it'll change a little, but it doesn't change all that much. It's really what is above that horizon line that is ever changing and really dynamic and totally changes the look of an image too. So I've always been really fascinated with dramatic weather and dramatic light, and storms are the best way to experience it. And growing up in the Pacific Northwest, we have storms, but we have, baby storms. And I've just recently, in the last couple of years, started really nerding out and getting obsessive, like it's kind of my MO, about weather and meteorology and convective storms and I've started going down to the Southwest and chasing like proper storms that produce tornadoes and, giant supercells and shelf clouds. And those giant storms that happen in the lower plains are just on a scale that you can't even imagine unless you've experienced it. And this is coming from somebody that, used to go out during every thunderstorm and watch and photograph. And then I go down there and it's like, oh, this is a storm. I've never seen a storm before because that is a storm. That is a giant UFO in the sky that wants to kill me. And I would be lying if adrenaline didn't have something to do with the excitement, because nothing will raise your excitement levels like a little bit of adrenaline and a little bit of fear, but that's also kind of what keeps you coming back, and the kinds of things that you can witness and photograph in those scenarios are just, it's addictive. It really is. And, combine that with like some of the beautiful light that you can get when you get the sun poking underneath one of those crazy clouds. Every storm is different. Every storm is unique and alive. It's like a living organism in the sky, and it doesn't happen every day, which means that like I've always been a believer that as a viewer of an image, you instinctively know how special something is. So like a set of conditions that happens every day, let's take like midday light in a landscape. As a viewer, we don't really feel much when we see something like that because we see it in everyday life pretty often. But when you throw, some kind of special light event like a rainbow that, it happens fairly often, but not nearly as often, we perceive that as something special. And when you take it to the next level and you see like a giant supercell in the sky with a tornado at the base of it, we know that not only does that not happen all the time, but me as the viewer, I would never put myself in a situation to see that because that is scary. So as a viewer of an image, like it's instinctively special in some way and it's interesting. The same way that like macro photography or an 800 millimeter lens image is different and unique and interesting is because it's not something that we see every day with our eyes. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that either, but that's kind of the appeal for me. Is it's just something unique and special and laced with a little bit of adrenaline. It's really, really addictive.
Yeah, it's always these differences, isn't it? These moments where the weather's different, where the mood's different, where the light's different. It's not just, I think, that it makes a more interesting image. I guess it also makes us feel more alive, doesn't it? And it's those moments where things are a bit different Absolutely. That we feel more inspired as a creative as well. Like you say, if you're looking at kind of midday weather all the time, it's not the most inspiring, or we see it all the time. But yeah, I do think it's that closeness to nature, though. It's like, wow, look at that rainbow, look at that incredible sunrise, look at that tornado or whatever it may be. And I love that you had such a deep connection to nature in some ways as a child. You know, you said you used to go out and watch the lightning storms and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm realizing the more people I'm speaking to that whatever they end up doing later in life, it always comes back to something that linked to their childhood. And it just seems like nature has always been like part of your life in some way. Would you say that's the case? It's always been a really deep connection for you.
Yeah, definitely. I was always the kid that I enjoyed camping with my grandparents growing up, and going out and fishing with grandpa. And I was not the most outdoorsy, but I enjoyed my time when I got to go out in the mountains and stuff. We live in an area where we have a mountain range just to our south, so we always had the opportunity to take a 15-minute drive and go up through the mountains and see deer and elk and wildlife and go camping and stuff. And I think that was always my happiest moments or my happiest memories growing up. So I think it's it holds a special sentimental place in your heart, I think, especially when it comes to, just like I said, nature is kind of our natural habitat. And I always feel like our mind is so much more calm when we just go out, spend a little bit of time outside listening to birds chirp without horns honking and the sound of vehicles, and just spend some time listening to those sounds. It puts us in such a better mental state. That's where our brains are meant to live, not in the crazy world of cell phones and computers and honking horns and sounds of traffic and all of the noise that we put ourselves through. Just going out and listening to birds chirp for a while, I think we would all be so much happier as a species if it was almost required. We should make this required, like, for everybody go out and just chill out for a little bit, listening to the sounds of nature. And I think we'd all be much healthier mentally if we did so.
100%. I really feel for people who have always lived in a city, and especially for kids who've never been able to get out and experience what a true nature is like, because like you say, it's so innate and natural within us. It's where we naturally have come from, and it's such an important aspect of our well-being. And the amount of scientific studies that backs up the incredible benefits of being in nature, it's unbelievable in some ways. But we're obviously very lucky to have experienced that firsthand, both where we've been brought up and where we continue to do our work. And I guess that's one of my visions for the future. I would just love to see us living in a world that's much more in harmony with nature again, and even in more built up areas, if we could try and find ways of bringing nature back, because even these little pockets of nature, like little parks or little flower boxes on people's balconies or whatever, it makes such a difference, and it obviously helps to rejuvenate nature as well as a difference to us as well. But yeah, being more connected to nature is so huge. And I think it's not, with your work as well, it's not just chasing these epic storms and these epic moments. You also quite often go into the woodlands and get really nice, serene, misty images. And the greens and the vibrancy and the contrast in some of those images are just so beautiful to look at. So it's lovely to see in your work that you do that adrenaline-filled stuff, but you also do this really calm, tranquil times in nature as well. And I guess you get quite a lot out of those moments in the woodland as well, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spend a lot more time in places in the Pacific Northwest with waterfalls and forests and stuff. I spend a lot more time there. My portfolio doesn't necessarily fill with those images because, well, honestly, those images are really hard. There's no giant sky to rely on and to save your composition when you're in a forest, because like you are in control over the composition in a forest. It's not easy. But I enjoy those experiences so much, and that's really where you're able to quiet your mind, and whether you come away with a good photo or not is completely not the point. the journey of just being out there is the point. I'm a really big book nerd, and there's a book series that I listen to, and one of the little sayings is journey before destination, meaning that the journey is the important part, not the destination. And it's so true with photography, and especially those types of shooting scenarios, because it's hard and it requires practice, but just the fact that you're out practicing is making you a better photographer. So it's not even about getting a great forest image then. It's about the fact that, like, if you keep going out and doing it, you will get a good forest image at some point, and you're getting better as you do it. And it's so enjoyable to spend time doing that kind of photography.
Definitely. I love the speak there about it being a journey. I guess everything in life is a journey, every single day, getting to different destinations, but definitely in photography you really feel that, because so often, we go out and we don't get the conditions that we were hoping for, and if we just focus on that end result, then there's often disappointment. But if we see it as a journey and as going out there and just reacting, then it can often, the experience is what gives us the pleasure, I guess, and the enjoyment. It's not really the end result. It's like those end images are the cream on the top of the cake if it works, but it's not like the be all and end all. It's definitely the journey, definitely the experience. And I guess it would be quite interesting to think about or go on to now, because you've obviously travelled to so many different places and been to so many different kind of countries and locations. And it's probably quite difficult to answer this question, but is there anywhere in particular or any experience in particular that you've had in nature with your camera that just sticks out above all the rest?
Oh, that is a tough one. These kinds of questions are always so difficult, but I would be lying if I didn't mention the most recent trip that I took down to Arizona, and this was actually with Michael Shane Bloom and my friend Mike Mezuel. And Michael Shane Bloom, it was actually his birthday, and it was the last day that we were in the Tucson area, and we were out photographing monsoon storms. And on his birthday, we got this incredible lightning strike striking this mountain. I just recently, I've got a giant print of it over here. One of my most recent Instagram posts is of this big print. But this lightning bolt struck this mountaintop, and anybody that's photographed lightning, you know that it's very difficult to get where the lightning is actually striking. A lot of times you'll just see a giant bolt and it just kind of disappears onto the horizon. Well, this one, it hadn't struck this mountaintop yet, but it was the tallest mountain in this area. The lightning was right over the top. And so we were pointing our telephoto lenses up at that mountaintop with our fingers crossed, and it just so happened that I got like I think it shot it with my 105 millimeter, but I got this beautiful lightning bolt striking the top of this mountain, and it was just like right there. So not only was it really close to it and impactful to witness, but it was also my friend's birthday, and it was the last shoot of a trip, and it was probably the best lightning strike I've ever captured in my life. It is the best lightning strike ever. And just the luck involved of pointing a telephoto lens at a mountain that had not got struck by lightning, and then having it struck by lightning during one of the exposures. There's so much that came together for that. I can't not remember that with fond memories, because it was just so incredible. And yeah, so that's got to be it. It was a really, really special, cool day.
Amazing. Do you know what I realised when I ask people that question is so often they go back to something that happened recently. And obviously that experience you had is incredible. And I've seen the photograph on Instagram. I can definitely vouch for how amazing. And just to be able to get all those things together, I mean, what an incredible experience. But it always fascinates me that people always kind of recall something that happened quite recently, because I feel like sometimes we see events like that and we think, my gosh, nothing's ever going to top this moment. It's incredible. But then, as we keep going out, things keep happening, things that we never expected. We'll see the most insane cloud diversion, the most insane lightning storm, the most vibrant rainbow that beats any rainbow we've ever seen before. And we think we've seen every gorgeous sunrise. And then you head out one day and there's one that's even more gorgeous than what you ever remember seeing before. And I think that's the joy about being out in nature, because no matter how many times you've been out, there's always something new to see, and the conditions are never always the same. Of course, if it's a flat, dull day, possibly we could say that repeats itself over and over again. But these kind of moments of awe around the gorgeous times of day, around the stormy weather, the changeable weather, there is never the same. And you can go to a location, 1,000 times and come away with different images every time, because it's all about that conditions, isn't it? And yeah, it's just incredible. It's so incredible. And I guess that's what keeps you going out time and time again and traveling time and time again, and because there's always something new to see, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I always say is that you have to play to win, meaning that the more often you go out with your camera and the more often you put yourself in a situation where something might happen, the more likely that it will. You kind of create your own luck. And the more often you're out and the more often you are out with your camera, just in case something happens, the more likely you are to come away with an interesting moment that would not have happened otherwise. It's kind of like the lottery. You got to play a ticket to win. And that's why you see a lot of the full-time photographers and the professional photographers. One of the biggest advantages that they have is just the fact that they get to spend so much time out, and put themselves in those situations regularly. And you kind of create your own luck in that situation. And one other thing that I kind of wanted to bring up, and I know that it's something that you've talked about a lot before, is that, also there's so much to be said for not going in with preconceived notions as to what it is that you're going to shoot. Just going in with an open mind, going into every photo shoot with a blank slate, just so you can react to whatever happens. And go back to that childlike, reactionary, like, ooh, look at that. That's something shiny over there. I'm going to go check that out. Just having that ability to do that makes all the difference in the world, because then you don't miss those opportunities. But if you go in with a preconceived idea or notion as I'm here for this image, it's like putting blinders on a horse. You're not going to notice all the other opportunities that might pop up. So the less preconceived ideas and notions you can go into a photo shoot with, the more able to be, present and to actually take advantage of those little opportunities that happen during a morning or an evening. The more likely you'll be able to respond to those things and actually notice them.
100%. I think it's really funny because when I started photography, there was this kind of idea of you have to really plan your shoots, know exactly where you're going, exactly what time, exactly what spot you were going to set up at, exactly where the sun's going to rise, exactly where the sun's going to set. And yeah, of course, these things can help us, as are good tools to help us potentially get good conditions. But I always find if I head out and I'm just plonked in one place, just waiting for that light, like I hardly ever will get an image that I'm happy with. But if I just go out spontaneously and go, okay, it's sunrise, I'm going to this spot. I know it can be a good sunrise spot, but I'm not going to go with any preconceived ideas of exact images I want. If I might have some ideas, but be open to it, because often if you're really engrossed in one image that you've got set in your mind, actually the action's happening behind you and you've not even realised. And often, sometimes some of the best light is actually in the opposite direction to the sunrise, if you've got that beautiful hues of purples and pinks in the opposite direction. So I love that you've mentioned that, because that's definitely something for people to consider. It's like, where do you kind of go between that bit of planning a shoot but also being spontaneous? And it's about finding your own kind of way, but definitely going somewhere where in between definitely works. I'm guessing, do you do much planning for your shoots then? Of course you're planning the storm shoots and stuff because you're chasing these storms and you obviously want to make sure they're there, but in terms of most of your shoots, do you do much planning, or you just try and be as spontaneous as possible?
I do planning. I try to set myself up for success conditions wise, meaning that I try to put myself in little pockets of interesting weather. And then I try to go in with an open mind, no preconceived ideas as to what direction I'm shooting or anything like that. I just know that I'm setting myself up for success, meaning, there's likely to be interesting light here, and there's there's stuff to work with there. Like a lot of times I'm shooting on the Oregon coast or, seascape type photography. So, it's an area of a beach that has, things to play with and things for the water to interact with or whatever. And then I just go and I see what I see. The best thing that you can do is to not have too many preconceived notions and not too many expectations, because it's really difficult to ever be let down or disappointed if you had no expectations to begin with. And when you show up with expectations, that's the only time you are ever disappointed. So I try to just, I look at the weather and I study the weather and I'm like, okay, we've got clouds here and we've got a nice break here. This would be a nice area to be. And then I'll go there and then I'll just be like, okay, let's see what we see. And that's kind of my philosophy on things. That way I can still be spontaneous and reactionary and just kind of wander around and see what I see. But I'm going and I'm doing that in an area where I'm more likely to have interesting conditions.
That's great. They definitely got a good combination going there. And that's, I think, a fantastic place to end, actually, is just to remind people when they go out, just don't have any expectations. Put yourself in situations that may increase your chances of getting epic lights and interesting images, but just don't have any expectations. And then you can never go home disappointed. You'll always have seen or felt or seen something incredible, and it's always worth it. So fantastic, Nick. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. If anyone's interested in kind of your work, I know you've got your own podcast and your YouTube channel and everything, so I'd love you just to share with everybody, where they can find you and if they're interested in following along.
Yeah, so if you just do a Google search for Nick Page, that'll find a bunch of stuff. I'm the non-comedian, but my website is nickpagephotography.com. My YouTube channel is just do search for Nick Page. I think it's Nick Page Photography. My podcast is the Landscape Photography Podcast. Pretty big back catalog of interviews and stuff on that. If you're interested in such things, that pretty much does it. You can find my images either on Vero or on Instagram. Again, just Nick Page Photography. So yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Kim. This is enjoyable. It's always time well spent hanging out with people with similar interests and nerding out about stuff that we love.
Well, you're very welcome, Nick. I mean, we've kind of had a little bit of conversation online over Messenger in the past, but it's so nice to actually physically speak to you. So honestly, it means so much to me that you've come and spent some time with me today, and it's lovely to have this chat. So yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's podcast. It really does mean the world to me. And if you'd like to get more involved with the Photographic Connections community, you can find all the details at photographicconnections.com. Now that this podcast has come to an end, there's only one thing left for you to do. It's time to pick up your camera and head outdoors. There's so many incredible photographic opportunities just waiting for you to discover.